Good evening. I'm going to be very short. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute. I'm very happy again that you're here, and I'm very happy to be able to open this conference with today's event. And this is already the end of my speech, because I pass on the floor to Eleonore Lapin-Eppel. I think you're not interested in my speech, so I pass on the floor, and she's going to introduce us, Tom Segev, and she's going to introduce the conference, the idea of it, and I'm also very happy to welcome her.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored and pleased to welcome you in the name of the Institute for Culture Studies and Theatre History of the Austrian Academy of Sciences for our opening lecture by Tom Segev. Our Institute for Culture Study and Theatre History has a project cluster that is called Sites of Memory, Spaces of Memory. Within this cluster, my colleagues Michaela Ragan-Blesch, Dieter Hecht, and Heidemarie Uhl. I see Dieter is here, my colleague. Yeah. We have now for 5 years been working on the project, the topography of the Shoah, memorial sites of destroyed Jewish Vienna. And I'm very pleased that we are approaching the end of this project and hopefully also the end of writing our book. In this project, we were reconstructing the history of the Shoah in Vienna from the point of view of the persecuted Jews. We are placing this history within the context of the city and also showing central places in Vienna of being contaminated by Nazi history, by the history of the persecution of Jews. I will give you just one example, famous Ringstraße, which is the focal point for looting, called Aryanization, but also for the expulsion of artists and academics. So you get a slightly different picture from Vienna when you will read our book. We are also trying to show this history, to visualize this history with photographs, pictures, and artifacts. Now, as you can imagine, with a project like this, you're dealing a lot with archives. And of course, we are also interested in the history of our sources. And out of this interest in the history of our sources came our interest in the history of the archives themselves. So this was the starting point for the conference, and I'm really personally very much looking forward to the coming 2 days. I also want to thank the Wiesenthal Institute for our cooperation. And of course, I have to thank the Rothschild Europe Hannah Dick Foundation, who has been financing our project as well as this conference. But now I am very pleased to introduce to you our speaker, Tom Segev, who will speak on archives, secrets, and politics in Israel. Tom Segev has studied history and political science at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and at Boston University. Until his recent retirement, he has penned for 30 years a weekly column in the paper Haaretz, Israel's leading newspaper. He has also published a number of internationally acclaimed books on Jewish history. His most recent work has, of course, a very important focus on Vienna. It is the biography of Simon Wiesenthal, called Life and Legends. And it was, when it appeared in 2010, elected by the New York Times Review of Books among the 10 best books of the year 2010. Tom Segev's earlier books include Soldiers of Evil, The Commanders of Nazi Concentration Camps, and The Seventh Million, The Israelis and the Holocaust. Presently, Tom Segev is working on a biography of David Ben-Gurion. He's also a frequent fellow and guest professor at different universities, among them Princeton University and University of California, Berkeley. And I'm very happy that he found time to give our introductory lecture tonight. Please, Tom.
Thank you very much. It's good to be in Vienna again. The taxi driver who brought me this morning to the hotel was called Wiesenthal. No relation, but it brought me back to Vienna. There was a time when acknowledgements were printed at the beginning of books. Today they are mostly appear at the end of books. I think that they belong to the beginning, and so I thought that I start my talk this evening with a word of respect and gratitude. I've often felt that those footnotes I invest so much energy in don't even begin to reflect the vast scholarship and invaluable advice which I have received in many archives in the world, actually ever since I began to discover the mystique of historical archives. And so I'm standing here tonight not only as one of your loyal customers, but also with a great deal of gratitude. Many, many years ago, I came to Yad Vashem for the first time. I was still a graduate student there, and I asked to see the archive. They were very nice, received me very kindly, obviously keen to encourage young scholars, and they asked what they could do for me, and I said, I'm interested in Yad Vashem. So they said, yes, you have come to the right place. This is Yad Vashem. What are you interested in? And I said, I'm interested in the archive. And they said, yes, this is the archive of Yad Vashem. You have come to the right place. Is it any particular ghetto or camp you are interested, or any specific subject you came to study? And I said, no, I'm interested in the archive of Yad Vashem. And so they said, this is Yad Vashem. And so we went back and forth for a long time until they understood that I had not come to study any camp or ghetto. I was interested in the institutional archive of Yad Vashem itself. And they said, there is no such thing. And so after some additional argument, they agreed that there is no organization in the world that doesn't produce papers. And finally, they said if I could possibly mean those boring board meetings, if I do, I was welcome to waste my time on them. They are stored somewhere in the basement, not cataloged, not registered in any way. Until then, nobody was aware of the fact that the history of Yad Vashem reflects a great deal of the attitude of Israelis to the Holocaust. There was no such subject until then. By now, of course, there are numerous studies on the history of Yad Vashem. My own study led me to discover, among other things, a conceptual brochure outlining the general idea of Yad Vashem, and it also contained first architectural plans for a large Holocaust memorial campus, and also some thoughts about fundraising possibilities. They also used the name Yad Vashem. And the amazing thing about this brochure is the date printed on it. The date was September of 1942, which means that most victims of the Holocaust were probably still alive when some people in what was then Palestine began to think about the most appropriate way to immortalize these people after the war. I don't want to be cynical about it in any way. In fact, I regard this brochure as an expression of the helplessness of the Jewish community in Palestine to do anything for the Jews of Europe. The assumption was that 7 million of them will be exterminated, and there's no way to save them. So the Jews in Palestine began to shape the future, in other words, the post-war period, including the establishment of the State of Israel and the country's collective memory. And I mentioned the Yad Vashem project as an example of the political aspects of Israel's Holocaust memory and the political sensitivity of Israeli archives. Collective memory is always the result of political decisions. That is true in many countries, including here in Austria, as well as in Germany, of course. Austrian and German collective memory had to struggle with the generation of criminals. Israeli collective memory reflected the generation of victims and survivors, and the Israeli experience was not easier than the Austrian and the German. Nearly 7 decades after the end of the Second World War, the Holocaust continues to be a major part of Israel's everyday life, including that of young people. This has not always been the case. When I went to school, at the beginning of the 50s, we didn't speak much about the Holocaust. Parents wouldn't tell their children what happened to them, and children wouldn't dare to ask. We were ashamed of the weakness of the victims. We were ashamed of the fact that they were murdered in such a horrible way, which seemed to us quite easy to organize. This was a time when Israel redefined itself as a nation and tended to disconnect itself from its past in the diaspora, jumping over 2,000 years of history and trying to connect itself directly to the heroes of the Bible. So we said to ourselves, we biblical heroes, we would have resisted the Nazis. We also saw the survivors as bad people, evil people. Because if they survived, they must have survived on the expense of somebody else. David Ben-Gurion himself said something along these lines. And we asked them, how come you are alive? We made them explain. And we asked them again and again, why didn't you defend yourself? And we refused to listen to their stories. And very often we didn't believe them. There is a famous story which by now has become part of the Israeli Holocaust culture about a boy who has been beaten 80 times in a camp, and when he comes to Israel and tells his relatives about it, they don't believe him. And to him, this is as if they hit him an additional 81st time. So this is a famous expression in Israeli Holocaust culture, the 81st blow. And the survivors raised their own complaints. Why didn't you do more to save us? Why didn't you show more interest in what happened to us? Indeed, the economic situation in Palestine was quite well. And except for a relatively short time when people living in Palestine feared that the Nazis may break through the British lines and occupy Palestine, this was for a relatively short period of time. Other than that, Palestine served as a supply center for the British Army, and life was quite comfortable, in fact. Simon Wiesenthal went after the war to libraries and read newspapers which were printed in Palestine during the war, and Jewish newspapers which were printed in America. And in a letter to one of his friends, he wrote that he thought that the leaders of the Jewish people should be put on trial. As he said, this would be a Jewish Nuremberg trial. So, with all that, everybody agreed that the best thing is not to talk about it. And that's when the period of the big silence began. But not only the reasons I mentioned led to that silence, also it's a very everyday, simple thing and very understandable that you don't know what do you say to people who carry a blue number on their arm. You open your door in the morning, the neighbor from next door comes out and he has a blue Auschwitz number on his arm. So what do you say to these people? How do you live with these people? How do you go to work with these people? How do you integrate them in your society? How do you love them? How do you get married to them? How do you make children with them? Something we did learn about the Holocaust at school, and what we learned presented the Holocaust as a chain of anti-Semitic, sadistic acts. We used to read books by the Israeli Holocaust writer Katzetnik, whose real name was Yechiel Dinur. And when you look at these books today, there is no escaping the conclusion that at least some of it is rather pornographic. Holocaust pornography was quite popular in Israel in the 60s. But more important than that, Katzetnik taught us that it all happened on another planet. That is the famous expression he used when he appeared as a witness on the, in the Eichmann trial. It all happened on another planet, not here and now, not as part of the Western modern culture which we all believed that we belonged to, not in our world. It was all somewhere where we have no responsibility, and it all happened, the other planet. Nobody told us that racism is not dead, and racism can lead to terrible things in the future, not necessarily in Germany. As far as we were told about the Holocaust, we concentrated mainly on two subjects, which I think that both were rather marginal, and the first I mentioned was even perverse in a way, and that was that we talked a great deal about Jews who collaborated with the Nazis. Judenrat, kapos. We had hardly been able to internalize the Holocaust itself, the fact that Jews were killed. We were already made to confront the fact that Jews were collaborators. Again, on an everyday level, people in Israel walked on the street, and all of a sudden they faced their capo from the camp, now an Israeli like themselves, the man who had tortured them in a concentration camp. And there was no law against such acts. The law against Nazis and their helpers was in fact directed against the helpers. And the helpers were Jewish. Nobody thought that we will ever catch Hitler or even Eichmann. The negotiations with Eichmann in several places, in Berlin, in Vienna, in Prague, in Budapest. These negotiations became a very central subject of Israeli politics, almost bringing down the government of David Ben-Gurion, also on the background of Ben-Gurion's policy of rapprochement with West Germany. So that was one central subject. That was the Holocaust to us, confronting the moral dilemmas of collaboration with the Nazis. Bad Jews, again fitting into the same tendency to disconnect ourselves from Jewish history. This all happened in the diaspora, of course, not in our new country. And they talked a lot about heroism and Jewish resistance. This was the other subject, major subject of Holocaust studies, a subject which both the survivors and the people who had spent the war in Palestine needed. And soon they began to speak about the Holocaust and heroism as if they bore the same significance. Over the years, it almost became, in Hebrew, one word, Shoah Gvura, as if it's part of the same event. Now, the concept of heroism has undergone a very interesting transformation over the years, together with other early Holocaust concepts. But at the beginning, it was mostly about resistance. And I think it reminds me a little bit of the emphasis put in Germany on the Widerstand, which is also quite marginal, actually. Now, everything I said so far reflects a huge difficulty, a huge political difficulty, to live with the memory, to live with the survivors, and to formulate the proper lessons of the Holocaust. Israel has always been a much politicized and deeply divided society, and it still is. Not surprisingly, there are endless debates going on in Israel regarding the Holocaust, even sometimes facts regarding the meaning of the Holocaust, and particularly regarding the proper lessons of the Holocaust and regarding the design of national memory. Very, very central subject. And these debates are often political in nature, and they influence historical research. Political historical archives are not a specifically Israeli phenomenon. In almost every country you have archives which reflect certain political directions and try to promote political agendas. Go to the Bruno Kreisky archive here in Vienna and try to learn something about Austrian history. But this concerns not only personal archives. With the years, archives were formed in Israel which were meant to promote certain lessons of the Holocaust and play up the role of specific political movements, left or right, secular or religious, in the events of the Holocaust. For example, which political movement fought with more heroism against the Nazis? Political movements among Jews prior to the Holocaust and during the Holocaust later developed into political parties in Israel. And so these debates have great political significance in Israel. For example, for many years, the heroism was associated with certain branches of the Israeli labor movement, which was then in power, playing down the role of right-wing political parties in the same resistance acts. The right-wing parties later became the government, today Likud, headed by Netanyahu, and with that political transformation also the historical picture all of a sudden changed, because all of a sudden information was revealed about the role of those, the heroism of those people who had belonged to the right wing. But I think that the most political thing about these archives, about all Holocaust archives in Israel, is the tendency to concentrate on the victims and play down any research concerning Nazi Germany. Except for the Wiener Library of Tel Aviv University, all Israeli Holocaust archives are concentrating almost exclusively on the crimes against the Jews. Much less material is available in Israel on the history of Nazi Germany. And one could not expect much of Israeli Holocaust archives in pursuit of information on racism in general, on genocide in Israel. The Yad Vashem archive contains a multitude of information documenting the crimes, but very little on the history of Nazi Germany. And I think it's no coincidence that most important studies on Nazi Germany were not written in Israel. Not even the most important books about the Holocaust were not written in Israel. Raoul Hilberg was not an Israeli. And I mention his name because I remembered, preparing these marks, I remembered a lecture I heard from Hilberg here in Vienna, I think at the EFK it was, shortly before he died, in which he said that Holocaust research has used until then only 20% of the material available in the archives, which may or may not be true, and maybe you can learn enough about the Holocaust from these 20%. Anyway, as you may know, 50 years went by before Yad Vashem decided to publish Hilberg's book in Hebrew. And that happened only recently, the reason being that it did not correspond with the official Israeli Holocaust concept. And that is what happened to, of course, to Hannah Arendt's book, which was never published in Hebrew until about 2 or 3 years ago. The most important biographies of Hitler came out in England and not in Israel. I think that the most important book on the Holocaust that exists today was written by Saul Friedlander, but Friedlander for many years lives in America and not in Israel. My generation of people, I think, learned first about Nazi Germany from the Hebrew edition of William Shirer's book. And that was almost a subversive thing to do, as far as I recall. It was published by a very reputable publisher, by Schocken, and I once checked it, and they found records indicating that it sold very well, which they did not like to admit, but eventually they did. Shirer sold very well in Hebrew, but still I remember that it was something you read, some outside testimony, something which you do not get in school. And during the Eichmann trial, the prosecution had a hard time finding enough documents in Israel, which would be enough to try him. They found a lot of evidence given by survivors in the archive of Yad Vashem. But even though they tried hard, they could not put Eichmann on trial without documents which they brought from Germany and the United States. The Holocaust cannot be written without documents, And by this I'm saying that survivors' testimony is not enough. We will talk tomorrow and maybe on Friday about survivors' testimonies. And to me, especially the early ones held at Yad Vashem, are very problematic because the interviewer accepts everything the survivor says, because that's the proper thing to do. A Holocaust survivor tells you a story, then you accept it. And you don't tell him, but the Russians did enter your town 5 months after the event you describe. You don't say that. And so, as an historical source, I think that we should be very careful using these. Yes, we get the atmosphere, we get the feelings of the survivor, we get a lot out of these testimony, but they are problematic. And I think that all this happens because the historical research, Holocaust research in Israel, was not only political, but it was always part of the national memorial culture, including the national lessons of the Holocaust. Israeli archives that have collected material relating to the Holocaust reflected, as a rule, Israel's Zionist agenda and other political attitudes, meaning that the Holocaust is the major proof for the validity of the Zionist ideology, in other words, the justification of the State of Israel. There is a sentence to that effect in Israel's Declaration of Independence. And so it happened that some of the most important insights of the Holocaust we did not learn from Israeli archives which are specifically concentrating on Holocaust material, but from other Israeli archives, such as the Zionist archive, such as the archives of political parties, and among other things, we learned from those archives about the attitude of the Jews living in Palestine during the war towards the Holocaust, and the first studies which documented that attitude were very, very shocking in the spirit of the shock which Wiesenthal experienced, and many other Holocaust survivors. Now, the trial of Adolf Eichmann broke the silence which I have just described. It was from, in a way, you can describe it as a therapy for an entire nation. And the Holocaust began to be what it still is today, a major element of the Israeli identity. There is not a day passes without some reference to the Holocaust in the Israeli media. Israelis mention the Holocaust on top of subjects which they think are worth remembering. And there is a study done among Israeli high school kids where 8 out of 10 Israeli high school kids say, yes, I am a Holocaust survivor. Why are you a Holocaust survivor? You were born in Israel, your father was born in Israel, your grandfather comes from Morocco. Why are you a Holocaust survivor? 8 out of 10 Israeli high school kids feel that deep of identification and define their Israeliness with the Holocaust. It's not easy to distinguish between genuine Holocaust feelings, which are very, very widespread in Israel, and manipulative Holocaust arguments. I sometimes think that if you develop the ability to make that distinction, then you hold a key for the understanding of the Israeli society. The Holocaust, as part of Israel's identity, has in the past influenced some very basic national decisions. The decision to bring into the country over 1 million new immigrants in 1949, half of them Holocaust survivors, makes absolutely no sense from any rational point of view. There were no places to house them, no places to, nothing to eat, no work, no medical treatment, but no government can leave Jews who want to come to Israel and not bring them to Israel after the Holocaust. The Israeli nuclear project, the so-called Dimona project, clearly reflects Holocaust sentiments. Why does a small country like Israel need a nuclear project? It does, after the Holocaust, according to what the Holocaust meant in those days. And the decision to start to attack Egypt in June of 1967, starting the so-called Six-Day War, that one reflects genuine Holocaust fears. But when the late Prime Minister Begin sent a letter to President Reagan telling him that he was sending the Israeli army to Beirut to capture Adolf Hitler in his bunker, that's obviously manipulated, and it appears in the newspapers the next day. Today, everybody is talking about the Holocaust in connection with Iran, of course. In the past, Arafat and Saddam Hussein and Nasser, all of them were compared with Hitler. Last week, Netanyahu and the large military entourage visited Auschwitz. But not only the government does it, the opposition does it. Everybody in Israel uses the Holocaust for all kinds of reasons. The Yad Vashem Museum is today very different from what it used to be. It is still very didactic, very political, very ideological, but it reflects very interesting changes in the Israeli Holocaust concept. There is a little bit more of humanistic lessons to be seen in the new museum. For example, the concept of heroism, as I said, has changed. It is no longer a woman who throws a hand grenade at the Nazis. It is also a woman who finds a piece of bread for the children. It's also prisoners in concentration camps who maintain some kind of human dignity. That is today part of heroism. Very clear political change in the new museum is the absence of the famous picture of Palestinian leader Haj Amin al-Husseini with Hitler. In the old museum, that would be the last picture. Big picture. That was the last thing you see when you leave the Yad Vashem Museum, meaning, don't kid yourself, the Nazis are still out there to get you. Today, the same picture is displayed in a very exact historical context where they talk about Bosnian SS, and that's where it belongs. Here and there, you hear universal attitudes in Israel, which are new. Things which Simon Wiesenthal wrote and preached before many other people did, many years before other people did. The Nazis did not prosecute only Jews. The Holocaust was not the only genocide. Things which very slowly enter the Israeli public discourse. And the major spokesman of these new attitudes is the man who had a great thing to do with the old traditional attitude, Yehuda Bauer. Yehuda Bauer wrote a book which is called in English Rethinking the Holocaust, which is quite provocative title, and therefore the Hebrew edition which Yad Vashem put out is called Thinking About the Holocaust. So these are still sensitive issues. I'm concerned by the fact that even today there is archival material relating to the Holocaust which is not open for research. And this material is held by two archives in Israel. The archives of the Israeli Mossad, which is the equivalent of the American CIA, and the archive of the Israeli Shabak, which is a secret police. These are two organizations who hardly admit that they have archives, but they do have archives, and they do have material relating to the Holocaust, and they don't let anybody see it. You can think of several reasons why this material is so secret. One is because it shows how little, actually nothing, has been done by Israel to search for Nazi criminals. In the 1950s, Israel was a very future-oriented country, and we didn't care much for old Nazis. But these organizations also employed some former Nazis, some of them important ones. Walter Rauff, Otto Skorzeny, the Austrian. So they don't really want to open these files. The Mossad and Shabak archives may reveal that they did, in fact, try to find some more criminals and failed. And that is something history is not allowed to know. So I think that they may also reflect sensitive cooperation with Germany, and interestingly enough, the other country that does not open archives containing Holocaust-related material is Germany. And the reason they give is very interesting. They say, we have been asked by another country not to do that. So we need to guess what other country might that be. I think that this is a subject that calls for some academic pressure and from the outside, some pressure by the economic community, the academic community outside can put some pressure on Israel. The man directly responsible for these policies, the man who is directly responsible for the Shabak and the Mossad is Prime Minister Netanyahu. As former ambassador in the United States, Mr. Netanyahu did a great deal to put pressure on the United Nations to open war crimes files of war criminals. Did I just say former ambassador to the United States? I hope I didn't. Former ambassador in the UN, he was, Netanyahu. So I think that it is unacceptable that Israel holds Holocaust-related material and doesn't open it. This leads me to my last point, and that is that the argument on the lessons of the Holocaust is only part of historical arguments which we lead in Israel, and they figure very, very prominently in the Israeli public discourse. We debate, of course, a great deal the origins of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and on the creation of the refugee problem. There's a close connection, of course, between the Holocaust and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, Israel has a relatively liberal policy of opening archives, not liberal enough to my taste, but more liberal than that of other countries, including Arab countries. Basically, until today, Israel tends to hide the truth, or the whole truth, about its actions against Palestinians in 1948. Until today, we teach our children that the Arabs fled their homes because that's the way they were told by their leaders. And we deny that they were expelled, all of them, or some of them at least. And we can do that because the relevant archives are largely closed. Now, the truth comes out anyway. I'm happy to report to you that Israeli officials have a very, very commendable habit, which really should be encouraged, or at least they had that habit in the 1950s. They take home secret documents and never bring them back to the office. And so Israeli historians are very often measured by their ability to locate relevant widows. And that's how we know a great deal about our history. This shouldn't be like that, of course. In that connection, I tend to think of official archives not only as part of the public's right to know, but also as part of the public's duty to know. And I think that it is the right of a democratic government to make it possible for its citizens to know. Open archives, free from political coercion, are as essential to democracy as independent judicial systems and independent media. They are worth a struggle and worth protection. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, you are...
Yes, the floor is open. Yes, please. Could you say your name, please?
Yaakov Borut, Yad Vashem Archive. And I'm not going to answer a lot of things that you said. I just want to say from first hand to refer to what you said about getting more records on the victims than on the perpetrators. And since I'm in charge of that particular operation of Yad Vashem Archive in Germany, I can tell you that we are trying to get our hands on anything that we can, both on the victims, on the perpetrators, but we are not getting it. And just to mention one specific case which I had, we are in contact with one specific state archive of land in Germany, and we have a sort of agreement that allows us to get one of their Bestände, one of their divisions of our choice, to copy. And also I saw the list of their divisions, and I said, I want the division of the NSDAP, the Gauleitung of the NSDAP in this particular land. And they told me back, this is not Shoah-related material, you have no right to get it. All you can get is something that has to do with Jews. That is one specific case, but there are a lot of cases like that, even here in Austria. The archives tell us what we can get. There is a lot of Datenschutz going on. One sort of material that can help about the perpetrators are war trials after the war. And we got a lot of them from West Germany, and we got the records with black lines over the names of the relevant people.
Yes, and you did in the 50s something which I'm not being cynical now, really, because you did a very, very valuable thing. Somebody did. They wrote the names back. So these records at Yad Vashem with pencils, so the records at Yad Vashem are probably the only place in the world where you can actually know what's the name of that guy, because the archive in Yad Vashem put it back, because they knew it was probably in the news or something.
Somebody did. I can say to that because I wasn't born in the 50s.
I agree with you. We heard today about the difficulties an archive in Austria has when we went to the and it reminded me a little bit about all this thing about privacy. Yes, so you know, and you can't reveal names and you can't use documents and so on. That I agree with you that, but I still think it's not for us to argue in public in Vienna, right? So but allow me. That's my my nasty quality. I analyze everything. And I was thinking when I listened to you that I think 25 years ago, somebody in your position would take a different line. They would say, yes, we are not there to document Nazism. We are there to document the victims, because that was the original tendency. And the fact that you say we want to document Nazism, but we have this or that or the other difficulty, is to me already part of the new Yad Vashem. I'm saying this really positively. This is the new Yad Vashem. So, fine. I'm for you. I hope you succeed.
But concerning the documents, a lot of our older documents are ones that perpetrate our record the perpetrators, such as the Schumacher collection of the Bundesarchiv. Just one quick reference to one specific thing you said. Yehuda Bauer is a very eminent figure in Yad Vashem, and Yad Vashem has no position to dictate to him the titles of his book, as you implied.
Maybe. Maybe not. Okay.
Thanks very much for a really far-reaching and stimulating talk. 2 points. The first having to do with interpreting what's in an archive. And you brought this is in relation to your wonderful searching point about the brochure from September of 1942.
Yes.
So I was wondering whether we could see that in a different light, meaning September 1942 is precisely following the great deportation of Warsaw Jewry, where 250,000 Jews in Warsaw, not to mention the other locales in Poland, have been deported to Treblinka. And they who made this brochure did not have the vision that we now have of those who are going to follow. So how I respond to that is, even at that point, in September of 1942, the loss is so extraordinary and such a watershed that there must be a response of commemoration that is bigger, larger, and more drastic than any before.
Yes. Obviously, that's a possible interpretation. To me, this brochure is so interesting because it is one of a whole number of phenomena which I studied, and all of which indicate that in those days they were already talking and thinking of the Holocaust as something of the past. In the Central Committee of Mapai, they would accuse each other of not having done enough to save the Jews. So save them now. No, but this was already an historical subject in 1942 or 3 or whatever, before the Holocaust was ever. Some lawyers in Tel Aviv who had been experts on reparations from Germany in World War I wrote papers about the possibility of demanding reparations from Germany after World War II. So the whole reparation scheme stems from during the war, because they were already thinking of the future. And there is even a linguistic element to that when they described, I think in Davar newspaper, the killing of Jews in gas vans. And the linguistic thing is, you don't speak Hebrew, but it is a past continuous. It is a thing that used to happen in the past. So they said they used to take Jews and put them in special cars, and then they used to put the engine in, and then this is the way you describe history. This is today's news. I'm not even referring to the fact that it appears on page 17 of the newspaper, but this is an actual journalistic report of Auschwitz. And they describe it as something that happened in the past. The whole society is future-oriented. The Holocaust belongs to the past, which is behind us, and that is, I think, also the key to the understanding of David Ben-Gurion's attitude to the Holocaust. He throws numbers all the time. He didn't have a plan to save 1 million Jews in the Holocaust. He throws numbers. Sometimes he says, we will bring 5 million Jews to Israel, we will bring 7 million Jews to Israel, we will be 3 million Jews to Israel, we will... You never know what exactly does it mean, we will bring Jews to Israel. What, next week? Or over the next 15 years? Or what are you talking about? So this is... the interesting thing is that to him, the Holocaust has already happened. The Jews of Europe are gone. This is also a time when the Zionist movement begins to realize that the future state of Israel will not be a stronghold of European culture because the European Jews are gone. And they discover the Jews of the Arab world. So all this fits together into, I think, an expression of helplessness. Yes, it is still going on. 7 million Jews will perish. But what do we do the morning after? So I think it's a very, very, very unique and interesting and very, very revealing about many things about the whole... it's actually all about the Zionist ideology. This is what the Zionist ideology is all about. It is future-oriented. It will all happen. It will all happen one day. If you only believe, it won't be a legend. And so I think this is the importance of this brochure, and I don't think that it relates to the Jews who had already been killed until that point. But maybe it did too, okay? I can't rule it out.
Hi, I'm Samuel Casso. Thank you for a very interesting talk. I want to refer to two different points that you made in your talk. One, you seem to, I think you supported the late Professor Hilberg's assertion that documents are more useful than survivor testimony. If I,
Not necessarily
yeah.
more. I don't...
Yeah. Okay, well then I misunderstood you.
No, not necessarily.
Okay, I thought I understood you to say that there were problems with
I always
survivor
think that
testimony.
individuals are... testimony of individuals is incredibly important, just as Saul Frindler does it in his latest book. And as we saw today at the archive of the Jewish community, you can hear that much about technical difficulties and microfilms and things, but once you actually see the life of a man called Solomon Klein in 6 or 7 documents spread on a table, you say, wow, this is the whole story of the Holocaust. This is all there. So I think that documents reflecting lives of individuals are very, very important. And survivor testimony is very, very problematic. As you know, I wrote the biography of Simon Wiesenthal, and he was more than once bluffing, and I was trying to understand why he does it. But he tells you at one time that he went to, that he was held in 5 concentration camps, which is true. A year later it became 7, and 2 years later it became 9, and then he was in 11 camps. And eventually he authorized a biography published in New York that said he was held prisoner in more than a dozen camps. Why do you need it? 5 is okay. 5 is enough. Why do you need to say more than a dozen? So I was trying to understand why he does it. And I think there's a problem about survivors' testimony. There is a problem with survivors' testimony, survivors tending to put themselves in the center of the disaster. This is the man who tells you that he survived the 50th floor of the Twin Tower in New York. Actually, he was in the lobby. So there is a tendency, it's a psychological thing. Psychological. So survivor's testimony is problematic. But if you have 2,000 testimonies and there are basic things which they all have in common, then they say, well, that's the way it was done. So that's the way they were killed. So you would accept it. So I have a problem with survivor's testimony, particularly about details.
Because the point I wanted to address, and maybe I misunderstood your reference to the importance of documents, is that you also mentioned that Yad Vashem and Israel has in fact revised its view of resistance. We now have the idea of Amidah, yes, which is more than just armed resistance, and right, it seems that that transformation of understanding of Jewish responses during the Holocaust is based largely on the extensive use, not just of ghetto archives, which may occupy an intermediate place between documents and survivor testimonies, and the massive use of survivor testimonies. Without the serious use of those sources, we would not have the understanding of Jewish responses, this expanded understanding that we have now, and that was not there in the 1950s.
I think it was there. I don't think it's really about the preferring testimony over documents or vice versa. It is about the choices the present people at Yad Vashem make. For example, very, very interesting example would be the complete dramatic change in the historical image of Rudolf Kastner, who was the arch villain, the most hated man in Israel. And today, Yad Vashem has a big plaque in honor, and I think I know what the political and personal reasons for that were. It's not that they discovered new documents about Kastner. Kastner showed everything he had. It's about interpretation. The same is true for the Judenrats. If you go to today's Yad Vashem Museum, the new museum, you will see a very, very interesting display of the problem of Judenrats. There is a good one and a bad one. And you, the visitor, you decide what you want to decide. So it's less didactic and ideological on this particular point than it was before. I think it's a choice. It's an historiographical development rather than new documents which have come up, or new testimony, as you say.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Brent from YIVO Institute in New York, and thank you very, very much. Enjoyed your talk very much. I wonder if you have any thoughts about the tremendous holdings of Holocaust materials in Russia, which is something of a new frontier of Holocaust studies, and the availability of it and the politics of Israeli-Russian relations now in view of release of those materials and the study of it.
I'm not too familiar with it. I know that at the beginning of the new Russia, all Russian archives were open. American researchers tell stories how they bring a Xerox machine to the archive and leave it there, and in exchange for that they get the entire archive to take out. That is no longer the case. And I think that at that time it was also possible to get a lot of Holocaust-related material from Russia, which I think Yad Vashem at one point officially announced that the number of the victims may rise. It may now be 6.5 million people. So there's more information about additional Jews which nobody knew about. And that's an area which was very difficult to research because it was closed. If you ask about Israeli-Russian relations, there is one incident which is extremely interesting, and that was right after the first door in Russia opened, a man called John Demjanjuk had just been sentenced to death in Israel. He appealed to the Supreme Court, and it was a representative of the Israeli prosecution, not the defense, who was able to go to Russia and bring back material and, as you call it, friend of the court, tell the court, unfortunately, I found open archives in Russia which shed doubt on the guilt of Demjanjuk. He may not be the right man. He may not be Ivan the Terrible, as I was telling you for the last 2 years. But I couldn't go to Russia 2 years ago because they wouldn't let me in. They let me in now. And they have no interest to get Demjanjuk off the hook. It's just archives which opened. We took the archive. And so that's an interesting, I think, incident in the history of Israeli-Russian relations. But I don't know what the current situation is about these documents. I tend to regard my own government as a Russian government in relation to withholding documents. Yes.
Michal Frankl, Jewish Museum in Prague. You have mentioned the silence about the Holocaust in 1950s, and well, we know the silence has been challenged lately very much as a myth, but it's not so much my concern here right now. But I was struck by, not only in your talk, but more generally, by the fact that this silence, however it looked like, this silence in Israel is being narrated as something very specific, bound to the very specifics of Israel of 1950s, building the new country, relating to the biblical times, as you have mentioned, etc., etc. And I quite, with all the new research about Holocaust memory, I wonder if we wouldn't profit much more from trying to analyze, say, 1950s Holocaust memory in Israel together with other countries, and especially, and that's specifically my question, together with Eastern Europe. Well, we know we tend not to do it because Eastern Europe was communist by the time and had no freedom of speech. But if you think about it, apparently even in 1950s, even around the time of the Slansky trial in Prague, you still have certain avenues, certain possibilities to talk about the Holocaust, but you need to adopt the language. You need to know how to do it. You need to talk about resistance. You need to be anti-fascist. And I wonder if you would profit to compare Israel and Eastern Europe in this respect.
I don't know enough about the situation in what was then Czechoslovakia, but I think that Israeli attitude to the Holocaust can be compared with German attitude to Nazism. And I think that there are several very interesting parallels there. Silence on the one hand, and as I said, resistance, Widerstand, as I said, on the other. And there are also some very interesting moral dilemmas for the Germans, for example. Do we condone anti-Nazi activity? Excuse me, it was my government. I was for him, and you were against him. America is now telling you that you did the right thing when you tried to kill Hitler, but was it the right thing to do? So the attitude to resistance in Germany was very, very problematic at the beginning. Israel had lots of political dilemmas connected to the Holocaust. For example, there was a left-wing party in Israel called Mapam, labor Marxist left. And they, of course, condemned David Ben-Gurion for trying to establish relations with Germany, only they meant West Germany. They constantly went to East Berlin, to conferences and everything. So how do you explain that? Why the ex-Nazis in the DDR are better Nazis than the ones who try to become Democrats in West Germany? all these are dilemmas which to me explain this basic tendency, especially at the beginning, to say, let's not talk about it, and because we don't really know what to say and we really know how to say it. I can give you a very interesting example, which is much, much, much later. Somewhat similar in the sense that we say, I don't know what to say and I don't know how to say it. And that was during the first, I think the first or the second Palestinian uprising in the 80s, the Intifada. I'm not sure if it was the first Intifada or the second Intifada. The Israeli army sends soldiers on a regular basis to Yad Vashem. I think the tendency is that each soldier should visit Yad Vashem at least one time. It doesn't happen, but there are large groups of soldiers going to learn the lessons of the Holocaust at Yad Vashem. And during the Intifada, numerous soldiers came out of the Yad Vashem Museum and said that's the way to treat the Arabs. And an equally large number of people went out of Yad Vashem and said, I will never go back to the occupied territory. I will resist my service in the army. And the result was that for a whole year, the army stopped visits of soldiers to Yad Vashem until they formulate the words which the soldiers can live with. So the Holocaust is constantly raising problems, not a week without some new Holocaust problem in Israel. This week, of course, the Netanyahu government is in great trouble because Hitler lost the elections in Tehran. And the new president, the new Iranian president, is supposedly more moderate than Ahmadinejad, and at least that's what the world wants to believe, and so how can we still compare him to Hitler? Maybe we need to sit down and formulate the words. This is again a question of how do you say it and what do you say. So this is why I said that the Holocaust is such a central element of the Israeli identity, really, and constantly troubling us. Are these people never go to Begin?
May I bring a point to another question? Up from Henry Friedlander and earlier, it had been clear that euthanasia had been the first step that went on to the Holocaust, and not only by the commanders of the euthanasia institutions, and that became afterwards commanders of Treblinka, for instance, but in general. And as I had been as visiting professor at the Hebrew University, and we made conferences just on this topic, when that had been in the late 90s.
Late 90s.
90s. Nobody.
Late 90s is not
beginning
early.
of the
Late 90s is quite late.
And then
You are right.
nobody wanted, the Gutmann and everybody else sat in the seminary, and nobody wanted to believe me.
That's right.
And then that had been one conference in Yad Vashem itself, where Paul Weindling and myself had been invited, and we sent our papers to be published in the Yad Vashem publications. They never had been published. That's also one of the things we must be aware of. We have now in Berlin an exhibition where we say twice doubled, badly treated the Jewish mental ill patients, and so that's also one of the things. And the other thing that I want, that's a quite different thing I wanted to mention, had been the closed archives. That is also the closed archives of the Sherut Refui. They wanted to destroy it, but before they wanted to document it.
You are talking about archives of You use the Hebrew term she'ot refui, which means medical service.
Yes, medical service in
what
the...
archives would that be? I've never heard that.
Yes, Dani Nadav had done the work to first only let it include...
What archives would that be?
From the Tzava.
Military records of the
military
Israeli
records
army.
of the Sheret Rufi.
Yes.
And those should be destroyed, but they should first be documented. They didn't know if they want to publish it. At last, these volumes now are published from war to the other by Dani Nadav, but I'm not sure if the documents in themselves had been destroyed.
I can't tell you.
Yes, but that's right. I wanted to...
I'm not familiar with that subject. Okay, thank you.
My name is Peter Ebner. I'm the son of Dr. Hugo Ebner, a lawyer, survivor of Dachau and Buchenwald, and he worked afterwards in Vienna. He was a very gentleman, and I want to make a commentary, just not to oppose any of the things that you said, but just to put a more general view or a parallel view on what you said about history and when and how people talk about history, which is archives, which is deposited in the archives. And it's like, I would call it a Gleichnis. It's
a compromise?
No, a
what? Mashal.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
When I was 13, 14 years old and came home from school. An example, yeah. And I was telling my father that unfortunately we didn't even learn about the First World War, and that was it. And he told me, you know what? When I was in school, we stopped before the German-French War of 70-71. And that was after all the history that he went through the war. And it takes at least 3 generations to be able to talk about certain things when the grandparents are not alive anymore. So this is not to contradict anything you said factually, but it is another view, parallel view, that sometimes I think explains some things that are not explained.
I think it explains how approaches to history, interpretation of history, historical agenda, how they change. That, I think, is what you explain. But not to talk about the Holocaust, how could they not talk about the Holocaust? How could they not talk about euthanasia? How could they develop that very, very narrow Israeli ideological view to the Holocaust? Yes, they could, as you say, but it's not because the Holocaust was too close, but maybe, yeah, right. Yeah, that's another equivalent to the land of the perpetrators and the land of the victims. Yes, the silence in Germany. Yeah, and it's very often also very, very personal, because so what did my grandfather do in wherever he was? So okay.
Thank you very much, Tom Segev. Thank you very much for this lively discussion.